Okay, Theseus and the Minotaur, retold by Olivia Coolidge. At Athens, the long reign of King Aegeus was coming to an inglorious end. The whole land was split by quarrels between Aegeus's cousins, who considered themselves his heirs, while the old king himself was completely under the sway of the witch Medea, to whom he had given protection when Corinth drove her out. Even the common people were tired of Aegeus, for he had been defeated in war by Minos of Crete, and the land was forced to pay a dreadful tribute every 9 years. Theseus preferred to make no claim on the aged king. He came as a mighty hero who happened to be traveling through Athens, and asked the king to receive him as a guest, thinking that his likeness to Athrea would cause the old man to recognize his son. Aegeus agreed to receive the hero, since he could hardly refuse the request of such a famous man, but Medea, the enchantress, who had learned who Theseus was, had already whispered to him that the young man was a traitor, who came to seize his throne. The feeble old king, confused by her dark spells, and made suspicious by the constant intrigues around him, believed her. Medea smiled to herself, for she knew that if Theseus were recognized by his father, her reign in Athens would be at an end. A great crowd of people poured out to meet Theseus at the gates of the city and escorted him with shouts and cheering to the palace of the king. More and more came hurrying from their house and dock and workshop, wriggling their way into the crowd to catch sight of him, or standing on tiptoe on the outskirts to get a glimpse of the hero's head as it towered above the rest. Even the palace servants ran out at last, and the old king pressed his thin lips together as he saw them go, while his scanty gray beard quivered with his indignation. "He is indeed a traitor," he said to Medea. "Look, he steals my very servants from before my eyes." Medea smiled back at the king. "I will deal with him," she said. "Let us go out on the steps to welcome him. We will greet him with honor and bid him come in. When he enters the hall, do you sit him down and call for meat and wine. I myself will pour his wine for him. He shall drink from my golden cup. There are poisons I have brought from Coolidge that the witch goddess helped me brew. Let him take but one sip, and that I shall pour for him, and he will never claim your throne." The old king nodded feebly, for he was half crazed by her spells. "Do not fail me with this poison," he quavered. "And now, help me to the door." They stood on the steps to greet the hero, the slender, dark-eyed sorceress, and the tottering old man leaning on her arm. Theseus turned from the witch in anger, but he looked his father in the face. The old man had forgotten Athrea. He did not know her son. He bade Theseus welcome formally and invited him within, but he gave no sign of recognition, and the hero followed him, wondering. The traveler was bathed and dressed for feasting. Tables were set up within the hall. Meat was brought by the servants. Wine and water were mixed in huge bowls, and each guest was brought a wine cup of red earthenware on which a skillful artist had painted some deed of a hero whom the minstrel sang. Medea would not let Theseus drink from his. "You are our guest of honor," she said. "You shall drink from gold, and a king's daughter shall serve you." And with that she fetched him wine in a curious golden cup, such as the great artists of Crete had made. Theseus took the cup and turned to his father, for he had a mind to drink his health in it. The old king was looking at him in a fixed silence, while his fingers drummed nervously on the table. There was something so unpleasant about his stare that Theseus was startled, and the first hint of treachery came into his mind. He determined to test his father. Therefore he kept his left hand on the wine cup, but his right instead of a knife he drew out, sorry, but with his right instead of a knife he drew out his father's sword and made as though he would cut himself a portion of meat with it. Seeing that sword, the king reached out, startled, snatched the wine cup from Theseus's hand, and dashed it to the floor. Then he jumped up and flung his arms about the young man, calling him son. And for her part, Medea, seeing her treachery was discovered and knowing that her reign was over, vanished from Athens and was seen no more. Aegeus proudly acknowledged his son and named him as his heir, but the king's cousins, who were not pleased at this, stirred up the common people against King Aegeus. It happened to be the time when the tribute to Minos became due. 7 youths and 7 maidens were chosen by lot from among the people to go to Crete as a sacrifice to the dreadful monster, the Cretan Minotaur. What happened to them when they got there, no one knew, for one who once went there had never come back from the famous labyrinth that Daedalus had made for the beast to dwell in. Men could hear the distant bellowing of the monster in his lair, and it was supposed he ate up his victims, though some said that they became priests in his temple. At any rate, because their children were chosen by lot for a dreadful fate, the people were furiously indignant. So too was Theseus when he heard the tale. "Why has no one dared to slay this Minotaur?" he asked King Aegeus. "There's no way to pay tribute. Let me go to Crete and put an end to it." "No, my son," said King Aegeus, terrified. "No one can slay the Minotaur, for the young men are not allowed to take any weapons as they go into the labyrinth. And besides, the victims are chosen from the people, and you are not of the people. You are a king's son." "All the more reason I should go," said Theseus. "I shall not wait to be chosen. I shall volunteer." The king implored him with tears in his eyes, but Theseus was determined, and the people idolized him more than ever when they heard what he was to do. The ship was made ready, and the chosen victims, small and quite unarmed, were loaded up, as the terms of the treaty bade. The ship had a black sail of mourning, that all might know that she bore the tribute to King Minos and must be allowed to pass. This time Theseus bade them put in a white sail as well. "For when we return," he said, "we shall come with open rejoicing, as a free people should." The ship put off from the bay, and the weeping people watched it go. King Aegeus sat up. King Aegeus sat on the headland looking after it, and there he told his son he should watch daily until the ship came home. But the chosen youths and maidens, encouraged by the cheerfulness of Theseus, sang songs to cheer their journey across the sea. And when they came to the great wharves of the town of Knossos, they put on a bold face. Even the powerful ships of Minos did not dismay them, or the sight of his huge stone palace, or the crowds of townsfolk who had come to watch the tribute come to the land. Many a man felt pity as he saw the handsome youth at the head of the little group and heard that he was the king's only son and that he was a volunteer. There was a talk of granting him a weapon that he might have a fair chance against the Minotaur, but the king would not hear it. The challenge of Theseus only made him angry. "How dare you come here in defiance?" he said to the young man. "Tomorrow we will throw you to the monster, and we will see what your boasts are worth." "I dare because I know that this tribute is unjust," replied Theseus firmly. "Armed or unarmed, I will fight your hideous bull person. If I prevail, I warn you, Minos, that we Athenians are a free people, and the tribute shall cease. If I die, I die, but the tribute is still unjust." Some murmured admiration at this boldness, but King Minos stood up from his throne in wrath. "Take his sword," he ordered his guards, "and lock the victims in the dungeons overnight. Tomorrow we will give you to the Minotaur, and after that the tribute will go on. The black-sailed ship shall return to Aegeus to tell him that he has no son, Theseus. The Athenians need to remember that the sea is mine, and distant as they are mine. They must live in a dread of my power." The guards closed in on the Athenians and took them down to the cold, dark dungeons. People watched them pityingly, for they knew Theseus had no chance. Yet they admired the handsome young man who spoke so boldly before them. None pitied him so much, however, as the soft-hearted king's daughter, white-footed Ariadne. She had heard Theseus speak in the hall as she stood beside her father, her bright hair about her shoulders and a great crown flashing with jewels upon her head. In the dead of night, she left her chamber and stole on silent feet down the long stone corridors towards the dungeons, and quietly drew the bolt back and went in. She stood in the moonlight, which fell through a little high window, and Theseus thought she was some goddess at first, for her white feet were bare on the stone, and there was a gleaming gold on her scarlet garment, and the bright crown was still on her head. She bade Theseus rise and come with her, making no sound. "I will give you a sword," she whispered softly, "which you will use to fight the Minotaur fairly, and you can slay him if you try." She took his hand to guide him along the dark passages, and together they stole down many corridors, past many a darkened door, until at last they reached a little room from which ran a passage dimly lighted. From here they heard echoing faintly a low, hoarse, bellowing sound. "Here's the labyrinth," said Ariadne. "Far off in the center lies the Minotaur. Bend down your ear to listen while I whisper to you the secret clue Daedalus gave my father that he might find the center of the labyrinth. To return is not so easy. Many doors lead out from the center, yet only one will bring you here. Take this sword in your right hand, and on the ball of the thread in your and this ball of thread in your left. We will tie the end of it to a pillar, and you may unwind it as you go. Then it will be easy to return as you gather the thread." She gave him the thread and the sword, and watched him out of sight. For a while she heard his footsteps moving around and around within, and at times they stopped as though he stood puzzling before the maze of passages, but then they went on again, and presently they died away. She stood there for a long time, looking at the shining thread across the floor and hearing the distant roaring which arose from the monster's lair. She heard when he reached the center because the roar grew suddenly louder and went on and on. Then there fell a dead silence, and for a while nothing happened. If Theseus were dead or wounded, she might wait till morning, and he would never come. It seemed hours that she had been standing, and the stone floor was very cold. At last she thought she heard footsteps. Someone twitched the line. The sounds came louder and clearer, till Theseus emerged from the passage with the sword red in his hand. She fell upon him eagerly. "Why were you so long?" she whispered. "It must be nearly dawn." "It's a dreadful monster," he said in answer. He was still shaking by the sight of the horrible creature whom few living men had ever seen. "Quickly, then," she whispered. "We haven't much time." Hand in hand, they stole down the long corridors again, roused the group from their dungeon, and sped down to the little ship which was moored beside the wharf. There were urgent explanations and whispers, and then sailors scrambled over one another to hoist the sail. Very quietly they cast her off and shipped oars as soon as they dared. Then they fled for their lives as the sky grew pale with the first light before dawn. All day long they raced away in panic, fearing pursuit from the great ships of the Cretan fleet. They had put up the black sail in the dark that morning, but when someone spoke of it and bade them hoist the white one, the sailors refused to take the time. Frantically they rowed till they were exhausted, landing in the last worn out on the island of Naxos, where they lay down to sleep. In the morning there was a false alarm of sail on the horizon, and tumbling into the ship they fled again. In vain Theseus called all to them. Oh no! Ariadne had been left sleeping on the beach. And even though they owed their lives to her, the people did not care. They were mad to reach Athens in safety. Ariadne slept without waking until the ship was far out to sea, and then she wandered for a long time up and down, calling vainly for Theseus and the other Athenian men who had forsaken her. At last, the god Dionysus found her as she came to Naxos with his train, and persuaded her to come with him to the heavens and be his bride. To proclaim all people that she had done so, he took her crown and set it in the heavens, where each jewel became a star, and where it can be seen still today. Theseus's terrified crew still raced towards Athens, but they had no thoughts in their head but speed. At last they came within sight of the headland on which King Aegeus sat, looking out over the blue ocean day after day for tidings of his son. Now, when he saw the black-sailed ship, he was in despair, for he remembered the white sail they had taken with them and the words of Theseus that he would come back in freedom and rejoicing and have the white sail hoisted to show it. The poor old man thought he had nothing to live for, and even while the joyful Theseus looked eagerly at the land, King Aegeus threw himself over the cliff to perish in the sea. Thus, Theseus came to his throne with mourning instead of rejoicing, and thereafter he reigned long, and his rule was a famous one. The Athenians told many stories of his justice, of his kindness to the common people, and of the ways in which he made Athens great. Traditions speak of Theseus offering protection to people who had suffered injustice in other lands. Some even declared that he gave up the title of king, preferring to give power to the people. There are also tales of his achievements in the war, how he fought with the Amazons and won their queen to wife, how he battled with centaurs, how he even went down to Hades in an unsuccessful attempt to carry off Persephone. There he was caught and imprisoned, and other people came to power in Athens. When he was finally rescued by Heracles, he never regained his power, but was driven out and died on the island of Sicros. Yet in spite of this, the Athenians always spoke of him as a great king and a patriot. When the mighty king of Persia tried to invade Athens in the year 490 BC and was defeated by its little army at the Battle of Marathon, one of the famous battles of all times, then the rumor went around and the legend lingered that on that day of crisis, the great Theseus, risen from the dead, had appeared to lead them in battle. Later, still, there was found on the island of Sisros a mighty skeleton, taller than most of the other men buried around. This skeleton was buried with a bronze-headed spear and a long sword. Taking these for the bones of Theseus, the Athenians brought them home and buried them. And from that day, the tomb of Theseus was a place of refuge for poor men and slaves, all who had suffered wrong. While they were there, no man could harm them. And in this way, the Athenians honored the memory of a just hero who was kind to the oppressed.